We talked about hormones and we talked about some of the hormones that help us control fluid and fluid balance in the body. So now we'll kind of connect that to what we've now learned about the kidneys and how it all works together. So yeah, so let's start with just kind of an overview of the water in our bodies, right? So our total body water is about 40 liters on average, okay, which is represents about 60% of our body weight. Okay, and then this kind of shows where do we find that water, right? So that 40 liters, we have about 25 of those liters or 40% of that in our inside of our cells, right? So the intracellular fluid is where the vast majority of our water is, okay? And so that's the intracellular part. And then we have the extracellular part, which is down here, right? So 20% of our body weight is extracellular fluid. So that's 15 of those 40 liters, okay, on the bottom. So I just uncovered 20%. That's all it is on the bottom there. Okay. That extracellular fluid has two compartments to it. Right. So it can either be in the blood, which is our plasma volume, or it can be the interstitial fluid. Okay. So most of that you can see is interstitial fluid. So 12 liters of interstitial fluid, which is 80% of our extracellular fluid. And then the other chunk is our plasma volume. So that's about 3 liters, and that's about 20% of our extracellular fluid. Okay, this little image, we can see all three of those spaces, right? So we can see our cells there. So the intracellular fluid is all the fluid inside of our cells there, like that, right? Then we have the interstitial fluid, which is all just the space between the cells, right? And then we have the fluid inside of our blood vessels in the plasma in there, right? So that represents those three spaces of the body. Put all the water together in those spaces, we got about 40 liters of water, right? So lots and lots of water. And that is, it's very crucial to maintain the right levels of fluid and electrolyte balance in all those areas. So that's kind of what we'll be talking about today. So questions on that at all? Okay, so ion balance is a key part of all of this. Okay, we've talked a lot about sodium and potassium already over the course of this year. Sodium is considered the primary determinant of the tonicity of our extracellular fluid. Okay, it's regulated mostly by the proximal tubule in the kidneys. And we talked about this last time, right? That's where most of it is reabsorbed, right? We bring back 65% of our sodium right there. Okay, the distal tubule can help out some too. And especially in the presence of high aldosterone, aldosterone acts on the distal tubule, forces it to bring back more sodium. So we get more reabsorption of sodium under conditions where we have high aldosterone. Okay, the distal tubule, yeah, that part there. So aldosterone is a key kind of regulator of that. And then with potassium, this is the major cation of the intracellular space, okay, so inside of our cells. So that one's key for maintaining all that fluid inside of our cells. Okay, the proximal tubule is responsible for pulling potassium back as well, just like it does sodium. And then the distal tubule, it does it in exchange for sodium, like we talked about before. Right, so for aldosterone causes us to bring a bunch of sodium back to reabsorb sodium, but it causes us to secrete the potassium. So those go in opposite directions in the distal tubule. So yeah, so aldosterone causes more potassium excretion, but more sodium reabsorption. Okay, so these two ions are going to be key for maintaining the level of fluid we have in those three spaces, in the inside of our cells and outside of our cells. Okay, there's a question on the next slide. If you want to start thinking about that and answering it, I'll leave this up for just a sec. But go ahead and chat with your team about that question and send in your answer when you're ready. Yeah.
Increase, the reabsorption on the distal tubule, or is
That's
that
its
wrong?
primary action, but it does actually affect multiple parts in the kidneys, but yeah. Whatever I have on the slide, I think we talk about a little bit more later. I can't remember if I say other parts too, but whatever's on the slide there is what you need to know. Yeah. 'Cause I teach it in 3 different classes, so I was like, how much do I have to make you guys know? I can't remember.
Thinking about nutrition, different these things.
Okay. Serving water and blood pressure. Yeah, the more fluid, there you go. The more fluid you got in the pipes, the more pressure there is for sure. Yeah. Got a sparse back row here today.
know.
That's what's going on. Scared everybody out. That means I shouldn't post the video for long since the quiz is partially over this one.
Yeah.
That'd be kind of mean then, huh?
No, maybe they'll show up later.
Yeah, maybe. All right, send in your answers. Go ahead. All right, make sure to hit the send button with this type of question as well. Some of this stuff we haven't talked about yet, so you might not know what ANP is. That's okay. You will after today. What's that? Yeah. We've only got 26 of you. I know there's more than that out there. Make sure to hit the send button on your clicker. Still only 29, but I'll leave it open for a sec. Just maybe hit that send button again. Let's walk through these. So the two that the class seems sure about were A and C. Okay. Oh yeah, I should have given you the other type of question, huh? You can't even go down past E, huh? Is that right? Or can you? Can you do past E? You could. Okay. All right. Yeah. So A and C were the ones that a lot of people put for sure. So which of the following lead to an increase in blood pressure? Okay, so definitely increase ADH for sure. ADH makes us hold on to water. It's also a vasoconstrictor. Okay, so the two main ways we can increase our blood pressure would be get more fluid in the body. Okay, because then we fill up the pipes more, right? Or we make the pipes smaller, right? We vasoconstrict. Those are pretty much our two options for increasing blood pressure, right? So ADH does both of those things. ANP we haven't talked about yet, but the decrease in ANP is going to be the one that is going to be responsible for that. So ANP is pretty much going to do the opposite of what ADH does, what angiotensin 2 does, and what aldosterone does. It kind of it's like just the exact reverse of all of those. So that's that one. For C is another one, right? So C is going to be when we increase sympathetic nervous system activity, what do we do to our blood vessels? Constrict them, right? We tighten them down. So that's another way to raise blood pressure. Okay. And then D as well, right? And that was yeah, some of you put that one, but D, angiotensin 2 is actually the most powerful controller of our blood pressure out of the hormones. And it's going to have us hold on to more water. It's going to have us vasoconstrict. It's going to do a bunch of things related to that. Okay, aldosterone as well. Right, aldosterone is causing us to hold on to more sodium, and then water follows that sodium. Right, so we get more fluid that way. Okay, and that's it. Those are the ones. Okay, questions on those? So A, C, D, E, and G there. And we'll talk about all of these today. Okay, so let's start with ADH. Okay, ADH, antidiuretic hormone. Who remembers what gland it comes from? What is it? Yell it out. posterior pituitary, right? Absolutely. Posterior pituitary is one of two hormones that comes from there. What's the other one? This is final review right now. What's the other one that comes from the posterior pituitary? The love hormone? Oxytocin. Remember that one? Yeah. Oxytocin is the second one. Okay. So what's the stimuli for it to be released? Okay. So osmolarity in extracellular fluid. Okay. So we have special osmoreceptors, which are a form of chemoreceptors in our hypothalamus that are sensing the level of solute versus fluid in the all throughout the body, but in the hypothalamus for this part. Okay. So when that fluid becomes hypertonic, then we increase ADH. When that fluid becomes hypotonic, then we decrease ADH. So hypertonic means we have less water relative to the amount of solute, right? So that means the blood is concentrated, right? That's usually what happens when we're dehydrated, right? We lose more water than we do salt when we sweat, and so yeah, so we have smaller amount of water, higher amount of solute. That makes our blood hypertonic. That makes us release ADH. Okay, but then we can also release ADH in response to low blood volume, which leads to low blood pressure. Okay, this is detected by baroreceptors now. So these are type of pressure receptors, right? That are sensing how much pressure we have on our big blood vessels. Okay, these are not as sensitive as the osmoreceptors, but this is another mechanism. So when these sense low blood pressure, then we need to release ADH to hold on to more fluid, bring our blood pressure back up. Okay, so the main actions that ADH has is that it increases water permeability in the collecting duct. Remember, so last time we were talking about the collecting duct, that's the last place the water goes through, or the filtrate goes through. It's passing by that strong concentration gradient that we created with the loop of Henle and the whole counter current multiplier mechanism, right? But the permeability of that collecting duct for water is dependent on how much ADH release there is. So the more ADH there is, then the more permeable that is to water, and we can bring more back. Okay, it also increases water permeability in the distal tubule, which means we pull more water back there. So overall, we have less water loss in the urine in the presence of ADH. Okay, so then how do we stop the release of ADH? It's just reversing the stimuli, right? So to decrease osmolarity, increase blood pressure, and that's going to decrease our ADH. That last thing that I uncovered on the bottom just says decreased ADH. Okay, so it's really just reversal of these two stimuli, which is what causes the negative feedback and the decrease in ADH. Okay. Questions on that one? So some of that's review, but it's a little bit more specific on where it acts in the kidneys now that you know a little bit more about the kidneys. Okay. All right. Okay, so a little bit more about ADH. A couple kind of connections here. Everybody's probably heard that alcohol is a diuretic, right? Makes you urinate a lot, right? Makes you lose a lot of fluid. It does that by blocking the release of ADH. So it doesn't let your posterior pituitary release as much ADH as it should be. And so then you don't have the collecting duct being as permeable to water. All right, so we don't reabsorb as much water. And we urinate more, and it causes us to be dehydrated. Other diuretics, there's a lot of diuretic drugs, and a lot of people with high blood pressure, people with heart conditions like heart failure will be taking diuretics. For other reasons, they could be taking diuretics as well. One real common one is called Lasix, which is also called furosemide. This is what's called a loop diuretic. Got our loop of Henle we're talking about last time, right? Loop diuretics block the sodium reabsorption on the ascending part of the loop of Henle, right? On the descending, it was water coming out, and then we run around, and then it was salt getting pumped out. So loop diuretics block those little sodium pumps on the ascending side. And so if we do that, right, then we actually don't pull the water back on the other side, right? Because that was the mechanism for pulling the water back on the descending side, was the fact that we put a bunch of salt in the interstitial space. So we don't do that as much. And then we don't create that strong concentration gradient around the collecting duct, and more water is lost. Okay. Diabetes insipidus is a type of diabetes where we don't have ADH release at all, or we don't have the proper ADH receptors in our kidneys. So this leads to massive amounts of urine, up to 3 to 20 liters per day of urine. This is a life-threatening condition. When you lose that much fluid, it can kill you. And so diabetes means, diabetes is really just from the kind of the thing that groups different types of diabetes together is lots of urination. So diabetes mellitus is diabetes with high blood sugar, and diabetes insipidus is diabetes with had nothing to do with sugar at all, but just no ADH. Did I already tell you the difference between that? I'm forgetting if I explained that. Yeah, where the doctors would taste the urine. Yeah, I thought so. Okay. Yeah, so this is the tasteless one, right? No sugar in the urine. But then mellitus is sweet, right? So it tastes the sugar there. Okay, questions on these ones? Okay. So ADH, recap here. So just go ahead and briefly fill in what are the stimuli, what's the gland, what's the hormone site there, and you can answer that question on the top. Which letter would be providing the negative feedback? Yeah.
So if the solution, or if it's like hypotonic, that means more water.
Mhm.
Salt.
Yep, yep.
And then same thing with hypoosmolar or whatever it is.
Yep.
What is that word?
Yeah, you could say hypoosmotic,
Hypoosmotic.
yeah, or low osmotic pressure.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay, so hypoosmotic is low osmotic pressure.
yeah,
And that is also high.
you got it. Yep.
Okay.
All right, go ahead and send that in on your clickers there. All right. I'll leave it open while we're doing this, so you can send that in. Make sure to hit the send button. But let's walk through this here. Okay, so the two stimuli we talked about would be either increased osmolarity in the extracellular fluid, okay, or a decrease in blood pressure. The osmolarity one is sensed in the hypothalamus by osmoreceptors. Decreased blood pressure is sensed in our big blood vessels in our atria of our heart, those two areas by baroreceptors. Okay, the gland is the posterior pituitary, like you talked about, hormones ADH. It's going to act on the kidneys, especially the collecting ducts. It's going to lead to more water reabsorption, and that more water reabsorption leads to a decrease in extracellular fluid osmolarity and an increase in plasma volume and less loss of water in the urine. Yes, and most of you, 80% of you put G for the negative feedback, and that's right. So it's just a, oops, it's just a reversal of those stimuli. Okay. Questions on this at all? Claudia, go ahead. Scant, what does scant mean? Scant just means not that much. Yeah. Is that the other question too? Yeah, Alyssa? The very bottom, the left side says decreased extracellular fluid osmolality, and then it also says increased plasma volume. And then the other one just says scant urine. You don't have to use the word scant if you don't want, but not much urine. Yeah. Yeah, it's a good question. You don't need to know the difference for this class, but it has to do with the way that it's measured. And yeah, in relation to, it's something to do with the actual mass of the solute versus like relative, but it doesn't really matter for the purpose of this class. So, yeah. Yeah, you can use them interchangeably for this class for sure. Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Okay. All right. So that's ADH. Let's go on to the renin, angiotensin, aldosterone system. Okay. This all starts with the release of renin. Renin comes from which gland? Kidneys. It's the kidneys. Okay. But specifically, those granular cells in that juxtaglomerular apparatus of the kidneys, right? So the gland is the kidneys, but very specifically, it's those cells that line the afferent blood vessels that go into those glomeruli, right? And so renin release is going to be stimulated when we have a decrease in blood pressure sensed by those granular cells. Okay, so we got low blood flow to the kidneys. That's the answer I gave you before when we talked about this in the endocrine system. Was it stimulated by low blood flow to the kidneys? But specifically, that's because we get low blood pressure sensed by those cells, or we can also have low sodium concentration sensed by those other special cells in this area called the macula densa cells. Those are the ones that are sensing the solute level in the fluid of the kidneys. Okay, and those are in the distal tubule. Okay, so the chain of events goes like this. We get renin release. Okay, it's not really a hormone, it's more of an enzyme. It's going to take this protein called angiotensinogen, which is just one of our plasma proteins. It's always floating around. It's made by the liver. When renin interacts with it, it chops it, cleaves a big chunk off of it, and that turns it into angiotensin 1. Angiotensin 1 is also an inactive protein. It needs to get converted into angiotensin 2, which is the one that does all of the actions. And that happens via an enzyme called ACE, or angiotensin converting enzyme. The ACE enzyme is found on a bunch of different cells, but in particular, a lot of it is found on the cells that line the capillaries of the lungs. All of our blood has to pass through our lungs. And so it's just a good place to put an enzyme that we want to modify something in our blood. Okay, so that ACE enzyme is also how COVID gets into your cells. That was all discovered during the COVID years. And so that was a big target when they're trying to figure out drugs and treatments, was trying to figure out how to kind of block this enzyme to make it so COVID couldn't get inside of cells. And so what does angiotensin do? Angiotensin 2 do. It causes you to be thirsty, specifically with salt. It causes you to release ADH, which is going to cause water reabsorption. It also causes aldosterone release, which causes sodium reabsorption and potassium excretion. And then it activates our sympathetic nervous system too. And when we activate our sympathetic nervous system, then we vasoconstrict our blood vessels. Okay, so that's why I said this one is the most powerful for blood pressure control, because it kind of hits everything, right? It causes ADH release, aldosterone release, causes you to be thirsty, and it makes your blood vessels squeeze down. And so all of those things happen with angiotensin II. The most popular blood pressure drugs on the market, the most powerful blood pressure drugs on the market are ACE inhibitors. So they block that enzyme. If you block that enzyme, you don't make angiotensin II, and your blood pressure is going to be a lot higher. Lower, sorry, that makes sense, lower. Yeah, we're trying to lower blood pressure with ACE inhibitors, not raise it. Okay. All right, so aldosterone is all part of the system, right? We've talked about where it comes from. It comes from the adrenal gland, from the cortex part specifically, okay? The stimuli for it to be released include angiotensin II, like we just talked about, or having high blood potassium levels. And we've already been touching on the effects of it, right? So it causes us to bring sodium back to reabsorb it, causes us to get rid of potassium in the kidneys, secrete it. We get more water reabsorption because it follows sodium, okay? So overall, we get water and sodium conservation, and it also causes constriction of the afferent arteriole. Okay, so the overall results of that would be we produce less urine, and the urine we do produce is a little bit more dilute because we pulled some of the salt out of it. Okay, caffeine is also a diuretic, and it acts by messing with this system. Caffeine blocks the action of aldosterone on the kidneys. And so it makes it so you don't do this, right? You don't bring the sodium back, which then means you don't bring as much water back. You don't constrict the afferent arterioles, then we end up producing more urine, right? So that's why caffeine is a diuretic. Okay, so that's aldosterone. And so let's take a look at kind of the flow chart of this whole system. We can just walk through this one together. Okay, so we're going to start up at the top with the stimuli, right? So we get systemic blood pressure decrease, which that decreases our GFR. Remember, right? That was the glomerular filtration rate. Okay, that's how much filtrate we're producing, right? So we're decreasing that. So same idea as a decrease in blood flow to the kidneys is what's stimulating this, right? Okay, so then we move on to what that causes, right? So that causes those juxtaglomerular cells, that just calls them JG cells, to release renin, right? Decrease in blood flow to the kidneys, we get a release of renin, specifically from those juxtaglomerular cells. Okay, now A there, we see that angiotensinogen was already in our blood because the liver made it. It's just floating around like our blood clotting proteins and all those other ones we've talked about. It's just there. But now renin's released. So renin is now going to interact with angiotensinogen, and it's going to turn it into angiotensin 1. Okay, so renin converts angiotensinogen into angiotensin 1. Now we got angiotensin 1 floating around. Angiotensin 1 is going to get sent to the lungs, where we have a bunch of that ACE enzyme, and then that ACE enzyme turns angiotensin 1 into angiotensin 2. Okay, all of that just to make angiotensin 2. Right, that's the key hormone here is angiotensin 2. Okay, so now all the actions of angiotensin 2. Angiotensin 2 causes sodium reabsorption. Okay, potassium excretion. It does that via aldosterone release, right? This is all via aldosterone release. That's what causes those things. Okay. also increases water reabsorption. All right, does that partially due to the ADH release that it causes? Okay, it also causes vasoconstriction. It's a vasoconstrictor. Angiotensin 2 is a strong vasoconstrictor. And then lastly, makes us thirsty and crave salt. Okay, the only one that's not really represented on here is the increase in SNS activity. But that's kind of related to this vasoconstriction one as well. Okay, all of that's caused by angiotensin 2. All right, so then our overall effect here, very bottom, it just says systemic blood pressure increase, right? So we're just increasing blood pressure. So just check with your neighbors real quick on that clicker question there. And I'll open it up, sure. Which letter there is the place where the final enzyme that forms angiotensin 2, where's it found? All right, go ahead and send that answer in. All right, I'll leave it open for a sec, but about 80 or so % of you are saying C, right, from the lungs, and that is correct. That's where ACE enzyme is found mostly is in the lungs, and that's where that last step in the conversion happens from angiotensin 1 to angiotensin 2. Okay, questions on this? All right, so we talked about ADH, talked about aldosterone, talked about angiotensin 2, and lastly, we'll talk about atrial natriuretic peptide, or ANP. Okay, where does it come from? It comes from our heart, actually. Okay, so it comes from the cells in our right atrium. But it's called an atrial natriuretic peptide. Okay, the stimulus for its release is stretching out of our right atrium. Okay, this one's released when we have too much blood volume, too much fluid on board. Okay, this happens with heart failure, happens with some other conditions where you just have way too much fluid and it stretches out our heart too much. And the body's response to that is try to get you to get rid of fluid, right? And so what does ANP do? It does literally all the opposite of everything we just talked about. It blocks ADH release, blocks renin, blocks aldosterone, blocks all of those. It decreases sodium reabsorption. It dilates arteries and veins instead of constricts them. And it dilates the afferent arteriole. When we dilate the afferent arteriole, that causes us to increase GFR, which means we're going to increase urine output. Right? The more filtration we make, the more urine we make. So the overall effect is we hold on to less water and sodium, and we decrease our blood pressure and our blood volume. Okay, so this is a response to too much fluid in the body. Most of the time, that's not the problem, right? Most of the time, we're lacking fluid, but in older disease states, sometimes we hold on to too much fluid, and so we need a mechanism for that as well. Okay. All right. So AMP, we can see this here. Okay. It's all there. There's nothing to uncover. But what effect does AMP have on ADH? It decreases it. Renin decreases it. Aldosterone decreases it. Effect on the afferent arterioles? Dilation. Okay, and then the overall effect is going to be increase urine, decrease blood pressure, decrease blood volume. Getting rid of fluid, right? Okay. So that's our last hormone. Our last thing affecting all of this will be our sympathetic nervous system. Okay, so our sympathetic nervous system is involved in anything that's important to the body, and fluid retention and blood pressure is a big part of that. And so when we activate our sympathetic nervous system under situations of stress, then we're going to, first of all, vasoconstrict that afferent arteriole going into our glomerulus. Okay, if we vasoconstrict that blood going into the glomerulus, then we're going to have a decrease of amount of blood going into the glomerulus. If we decrease that, then we're going to decrease our hydrostatic pressure going into the glomerulus. So then turn to your neighbor and decide if that's going to increase or decrease GFR. Ask each other. Give me a thumbs up or a thumbs down. Increase or decrease? Okay. No sideways thumbs, Molly. You got to go all the way. There you go. Thank you. You're just trying to get there. Yeah. Okay. Absolutely. Everybody's saying it decreases, right? So this makes sense, right? If we're under stress, the body doesn't want to lose fluid, right? If we have a high GFR, we're losing a lot of fluid. When we're under stress, we don't want to do that, so we hold on to more fluid. So that's the effects of the sympathetic nervous system. Okay. We also know that it vasoconstricts all of our blood vessels around the body, so that would raise our blood pressure up too, right? So this is definitely going to lead to an increase in blood pressure, partially because we hold on to more fluid, but partially because we constrict our vessels too. Okay, so the last 4 slides here are kind of all the same thing. We're just going to kind of put these concepts together, okay? So we're talking about how the body would respond to specific changes in homeostasis, okay? So it's what we call an integrated response, right? So we're thinking about all those hormones in the sympathetic nervous system, how they would react to a certain change, okay? So the first change we're talking about is increased osmolarity of extracellular fluid, meaning that we don't have as much water and we have a lot of solute, right? So the blood's kind of concentrated. This is what it looks like when we're dehydrated, okay? So this is going to be sensed by those osmoreceptors in the hypothalamus and in the kidneys in the juxtaglomerular apparatus. Okay, that's going to lead to an increase in ADH. All right, so ADH increases. Okay, that leads to a decrease in renin. Okay, so with your people on your team for a sec, fill in what that does. What does it do if we increase our ADH and decrease our renin? And then this decreases our osmolarity, okay? But then connect that with what you said up there, okay? Take a second and do that. What are the effects of these two things? So write it down. Don't wait for me to write anything. You got to write it down yourself.
Yes. Wait, I'm confused.
Okay. You're not writing, Isabel. You got to write. You got to write.
Oh, I'm sorry, I'm like zoning out today. It's holding in water, ADH, an increase in
Yeah.
ADH is gonna hold in more water.
Yeah.
How does that decrease our three?
Because that's like, if you have something with a lot of salt and not much water and you add water to it, now we've got more close to similar amount of salt and
So
water,
it's like
right?
more ice.
Or like, yeah, we're diluting it, right? Taking like a,
Oh, yeah, because we're holding more, oh, yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
sorry, that.
yeah. Yeah. Not necessarily the ones that are posted, but, I think I do Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and then some on Thursday, but I don't have any posted on Tuesday. What's that?
Like, I'm so lazy to go inside.
Just sign up.
Let's go.
Yeah. You can always talk to me after class. We can put some on the calendar too. That's
Okay.
fine. Yeah, yeah.
You just see, what can you go on with?
Oh, you can bring your friends. Yeah, okay,
Okay.
yeah. Yeah. Okay, so let's come back together here. All right, so we got this increase in osmolarity, meaning like we don't have a lot of water. We have a lot of salt, more salt relative to water. Okay, so the water part is going to be dealt with by ADH, right? So what does ADH do? When we increase ADH, what are the effects? What is it? Tell me. Hold on to more water. Hold on to water. So we reabsorb more water in the kidneys, right? We're also going to get thirsty. All right, so we get thirst. Okay. Yeah, we're going to have less water loss, right? We don't urinate out as much water. Okay, so that raises the water back up. But then, since we also sense this down here in the juxtaglomerular apparatus, that's going to, seeing we had too much salt, pretty much, right? There was too much salt with high osmolarity. Okay, this is going to make us decrease renin, right? So when we decrease renin, then we're going to decrease aldosterone. Okay, which is then going to decrease sodium reabsorption. Okay, so we let more sodium go in the urine. Okay. Yeah, so that's kind of the key one we'll talk about there. Yes, angiotensin 2 also stimulates ADH release, but we've already got that. We're already kind of overriding that effect here. So the easiest way to think about this is when there's a problem with fluid or water, ADH is the primary one that deals with that. When there's a problem with salt, sodium, renin is the primary one that deals with that. That's just write that down. That's the easiest way to think of it. Even though there's overlap between the two systems, ADH has a stronger effect on water. Renin has a stronger effect on the sodium. Okay, so our overall effect here is increase water, decrease sodium. All right, because our initial problem was too much sodium, not enough water, right? So our overall effect is hold on to more water, let go of more sodium. It just says increase water, decrease sodium. Okay. Questions on that one? Okay, the next slide is just the opposite. Okay, so when we have a decrease in osmolarity of extracellular fluid, same thing, sensed by the osmoreceptors and hypothalamus and the juxtaglomerular apparatus. Okay, instead of increasing ADH, now we're decreasing ADH. Okay, so we're going to decrease thirst. All right, so we're less thirsty. We're going to lose more water. All right, so when our fluid has a low osmolarity, that means there's extra water and not enough sodium. All right, so too much water, not enough sodium. So one good way to deal with that would be decrease ADH, because that's going to make us get rid of some of that excess water. Right? So now we'll start getting rid of some of that excess water, but we need to keep more sodium, right? So we increase renin, which is going to increase aldosterone, which is then going to increase sodium reabsorption. So our final result, I'll write it on top so you guys can see it better back there, would be decrease water, increase sodium in the body. Okay, so just the opposite of the stimuli, right? Okay, so this would be like someone that drank way too much water, right? And never replenished any electrolytes, but just drank a ton of water, right? You'd have a diluted uh, fluid in your body. You can hurt yourself badly by drinking way too much water, right? There's like these weird like radio like water challenges a while back where people died because they drank too much water without any salt. Takes like gallons and gallons, but yeah. I mean, it's not something you would do naturally. You would have to like force yourself. I mean, these people would drink like 3 or 4 gallons of water like in like an hour, right? But you can, but it does happen every once in a while in like marathons and stuff like that. People end up with what's called hyponatremia, which means real low sodium. Right? But a lot of times that can come when people run a marathon and they're just replenishing water and not having any electrolytes along with that. So it can happen, but it leads to mental symptoms like confusion and kind of massive fatigue, and because it starts causing your brain to swell. Yeah. Other questions on that? Okay, so 2 more. Now, if the disruption is about volume of fluid in your body, but not about the concentration of sodium versus water. So if we have too much blood volume, which is the case with heart failure patients, okay, this is going to be sensed by those baroreceptors now in the atria, the large veins, carotid sinuses, and in the kidneys. Okay, so we can see our actions there. So decrease sympathetic activity, increase ANP, decrease ADH, decrease renin. You guys take a second and fill in those actions, okay? Nothing super detailed. It's just all about increase water, increase salt, decrease salt. That's all you got to write.
Yeah, so we want to, so it's gonna be.
All right, I'm filling in my answer here. Okay, so we've got less sympathetic activity, which causes vasodilation of that afferent arteriole, which increases our GFR, which makes us urinate more, right? So increased water loss because of that. ANP is going to block ADH, block aldosterone, block renin, makes us lose more water and sodium. Decrease ADH means we reabsorb less water. Decrease renin means we reabsorb less sodium. Okay, so overall we get less blood volume. So our blood pressure is going to go down, right? So water goes down and sodium goes down. Both of them go down together. Okay, so then our blood volume drops. I was having a crisis in my head because I couldn't remember if class ended at 2:20 or 2:25, but it's coming back to me now. It's 2:25. I know it is, but that was really hard for me. I wasn't sure. Yeah, Morgan. Aldos, but for aldosterone, yeah, yeah, yeah. Lose water and sodium. Yeah, we lose more water and more sodium. Yeah. What else? What other interpretations do we need? Translations. Anything else? Got it. Okay, the next slide is just the opposite. So I'll let you guys figure that one out on your own. The other thing I was gonna say, I thought maybe we would get done in time to do this in class, but we're not. So you just got an email from me saying, fill out this survey. It's the course evaluation for this class. I'll give you 2 extra credit points if you do it sometime between now and, I don't know, it's due in a couple weeks, but so just fill it out. I always appreciate your feedback and take that into consideration. So that's it. Have a great weekend, guys. Don't forget to do the quiz. Yeah, thank you, Scott.